Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar on coronavirus prioritizing employee well-being. My name is Michael Chan, Program Manager of Responsible Business at Community Business. Joining me today in moderating this webinar is my colleague, Sakshi Kumar, Program and Content Manager of the Diversity and Inclusion in Asia Network at Community Business.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Many of you joining us today are already aware of Community Business, but for the benefit of those who don't know us, a very quick introduction about Community Business. We are a not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to lead, inspire, and support companies to have a positive impact on people and communities. Over the past 17 years, we have worked with all sizes of organizations across different industries, primarily in Hong Kong, mainland China, Singapore, India, Japan, and the Philippines. Our work focuses on supporting organizations to promote social inclusion, tackle workplace inclusion, workplace inequalities, as well as ensuring employee well-being, and really looking to create and develop a responsible organization and leadership within their companies. We do this through our corporate networks, our pioneering research, benchmarking tools, events, as well as our consulting and training services.
As the title of this webinar suggests, today's discussion will be focusing on the impact of the coronavirus outbreak on employee well-being. And we're zeroing in on the emotional well-being of employees. Since earlier this year, countries and regions around the world have been overshadowed by the rapid spread of the coronavirus, now officially named as the COVID-19, which originated in the Chinese city of Wuhan, Hubei province. There are currently approximately 80,000 cases worldwide, and we are not sure when this epidemic will stop. As the epidemic unfolds, it is becoming psychologically overwhelming for both employers and employees in Hong Kong and in the APAC region to adapt and to maintain operations and to even keep businesses afloat. Not only is the outbreak triggering worries and fears, but we are also now in, some say, the largest work-at-home experiment in the entire world. Working at home for a long time without the usual community of colleagues might induce loneliness and loss in motivation. At the same time, there's also a rise in xenophobic attitudes and behaviors towards people of Asian descent across the world in the wake of the coronavirus. So we'll be discussing what should be an appropriate response and the leadership role companies can play in supporting and promoting the positive emotional well-being of their employees.
So it's really been a interesting time that we're all seeing and finding ourselves in. And to help us understand the implications of all of this to employee well-being and our workplaces, we have two experts joining us today. We have Fern Ngai, the CEO of Community Business. Fern has held several leadership roles across different functions at Standard Chartered Bank and was its first diversity and inclusion champion. And she's going to draw on over 40 years of experience in financial services, technology, change management, and in designing and implementing diversity and inclusion programs. And she will share her thoughts and advice on how companies can prioritize employee well-being in times like these. We are also delighted to be joined by Dr. Hannah Reedy, the CEO of Mind Hong Kong, a charity that is committed to improving the awareness and understanding of mental health in Hong Kong. Hannah is a trained clinical psychologist from the UK, getting her degrees from Oxford and University College London. She's also experienced as a practicing clinical psychologist herself. And her work has spanned across social inclusion programs in the UK. So she will be sharing her expertise and providing us with some recommendations on how we can better manage well-being. Welcome, Fern and Hannah. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. We're having a few technical difficulties. So Hannah, we're hearing a lot about fear and emotions, be it distrust, loneliness, confusion, a loss of motivation that we're all experiencing, finding ourselves in this situation. Could you, tell us how do you think this in Hong Kong and in Asia has impacted our emotional well-being?
Sure, and thank you both very much for having me join you guys today. I think this is such an important topic, and I'm really delighted to be a part of it and to share the stage with Fern as well, who I greatly admire. I'm just going to put my video on for a little while, as I'm actually currently not in Hong Kong, and therefore my internet is slightly dubious, so I don't want to take up all the bandwidth of my video. So I will switch my screen off now, but just wanted people to see my face. So in answer to your question, I think that there is a huge amount of emotional toll due to the coronavirus. Quite a lot of it is negative, as you say. So there's a lot of anxiety and fear. People are very worried about uncertainty in the terms of the future, in terms of what will happen, both due to the virus itself, but also the consequences of the virus. There is a real mistrust in reports and media reports, as well as other sources, which is adding to that anxiety. And coupled with this, there is a feeling of hopelessness. So there's a sort of a loss of motivation due to the fact that people aren't quite sure when this crisis will end. We'll cover it more later, but there's been a lot of loneliness due to the fact that people have been working remotely, schools have been shut down. But it's also important to note that there are some emotional responses that are coming up which are not so negative. So due to the fact that coronavirus is such a shared experience, we are noticing that people are talking a lot more about mental health, which is not a bad thing. I think one thing that we should bear in mind is the fact that we did not start from a level playing field in terms of our mental health in Hong Kong. Firstly, the population had been really struggling with their mental health due to quite a few months of difficulty due to the social situation and the political situation in Hong Kong. And secondly, people are not fresh to a viral related crisis. A lot of people in Hong Kong still remember SARS, and that's causing memories and trauma from that to be dug up again from 15 years ago. So I think it's really important that we bear all of those things in mind when we consider the sorts of responses that coronavirus is generating.
Start over. Hello. Okay, we are back now. So thank you for that, Hannah. Those are really interesting key statistics. And, with this information, and as we're finding with a lot of information that's out there readily available for all of us to consume and refer back to, there starts to be a little bit of confusion as to what can we do? What are some practical steps? So in terms of some signs to look out for or something to be aware of, what is it that HR leaders, business managers, people leaders within the organization should be aware of in terms of looking out for the well-being of their employees?
Sure. So I think that one really easy cover rule to remember is just look for a change. So as employers, as HR leaders, you guys are very well equipped to know your staff. And if you don't know the staff personally, then you have line managers and people that you work with who do know their teams very well. And the one big thing that we can say in terms of how we should be viewing individuals' mental health is that mental health problems tend to exhibit themselves in a change to behaviour. So on the slide, you can see that there are some early warning signs that could suggest that there is a difficulty in someone's mental health. Now, these are general warning signs, but any sign of alcohol or substance misuse that would suggest that someone may be finding things difficult and using strategies to comfort themselves. Any eating or appetite changes are very common in someone who is experiencing a mental health problem. If someone is exhibiting problems with sleeping, they will tend to either be tired all the time or be keeping irregular hours in the office. Again, sleep is wrapped up with lots of different mental health problems. Individuals may well be explaining and complaining that they have aches and pains physically. Physical and mental health are very, very linked together, and therefore unexplained aches and pains can often be a pointer to the fact that someone is mentally not doing so well. You might see that people are exhibiting extremes of emotion. So they might be either being very sad or very angry or very happy or seeming to be slightly overactivated and overexcited. Any of these things could be pointers that if someone is not normally like that, their mental health may be suffering. Similarly, and in contrast, if someone is silent or withdrawn, that may well be a sign that their mental health is not doing so well. A final pointer on this slide for general early warning signs is incoherent speech. And we say that because when someone is experiencing more severe mental health problems, they can find it very difficult to concentrate on what they're saying, and their cognitive function can be impeded in some way. So you might notice that their way that they're speaking doesn't seem normal. Now that's more generalist terms. However, in terms of workplace relationships, you can notice a change to the level of productivity that people are engaging in. So if you've got someone who is at a set level of productivity normally, you may notice that they are decreasing their productivity, or in contrast, they might be actually becoming more productive because they are having to concentrate lots of energy into doing their work. In terms of generally differing hours spent at their desk in the office or at work may indicate that that sleep routine or that general life routine has been disrupted in some way. Another big thing that we see within workplaces is that someone, when they're struggling with their mental health, struggles to bring their whole self to work. So someone who may have been more engaged with office socializing or extracurricular activities might start to withdraw. So if you have someone who would normally go to lunch with other people or who would normally stay late for a drink and they stop doing that, that might be a key sign that in terms of workplaces, there's social withdrawal occurring, which could be a sign that someone's mental health is suffering.
Thank you. Those are really telling signs and very clear. Thank you for your guidance on that. But with the current situation and most of us working remotely away and not coming into the offices, a lot of these signs have to do with spotting behavior and appearance and their emotions and general well-being. It would be a lot easier to do if they were present in person. How do we look for these signs in a remote working situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is difficult because we are not used to working remotely in Hong Kong. In most of the corporates and businesses, we have a big culture of being in the office for hours that are sometimes extended. So people are very used to working in close proximity to each other. And indeed, actually, working in the office can be a really great mental health experience for many people, as it gives them space and it gives them a sense of identity and purpose away from the home. There's been a recent survey of remote working, and of the people that were working from home, about 20% found it lonely and 22% found it difficult to kind of unplug after they'd been at work. Now, these figures are actually quite low. So I would hypothesize that the figures are going to be higher in Hong Kong because what has caused this remote working is not a choice, it's that it's been imposed upon people, so that they're not prepared to do that. So in terms of remote working, you do have to be more in tune with what someone might normally be like in terms of their technological and email behavior. So it's about knowing your workforce, knowing how they normally would be in the office and adapting that to how they are working remotely. So if you're noticing that work is being completed at strange times of the day or emails are being sent at strange times of the day, again, it's looking for a change of behavior. If you've got someone who always sends emails at night, or always tends to finish off their day at a random time, we're not advocating that this is great for mental health, because it's about having a balance, but that wouldn't be a change in their behavior. But if you have someone who normally is relatively 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, and suddenly they're sending emails at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, that might suggest that their routine has been severely disrupted, which could be a sign. If people are missing meetings or missing remote check-ins, that may well be a sign that they are not doing so well, but they're trying to juggle several other things or several other stressful experiences. It may also be a sign that they are finding things difficult and therefore not able to check in. And as we know, social isolation is so tied in with lowered mental health and well-being. It's really important that we try and keep people connected. If you notice that people are becoming inactive, so they're simply not getting work done, that lack of productivity can be frustrating, but it's really important to get to the bottom of why it's happening. Individuals, as we know, are experiencing high levels of anxiety. On the slide earlier, we noted that 80% were experiencing a mental burden due to coronavirus. So it's about checking in why someone isn't providing work at the time that they've expected to do so. And the final point on this slide is really that sometimes it can be less confrontational to check in directly. Although remote working is not an ideal circumstance for many, actually being able to gently check in over a message or over an email rather than scheduling a meeting can feel less controversial or in some way contradicting the idea that someone is working well. So it can be quite a gentle way of checking in on somebody.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, and I particularly like the last point you made there about just setting up more informal ways of checking in with each other to try and also make sure that we're not only talking about work when we reach out to our colleagues. Yeah, great. So in terms of, we talked a fair bit about social distancing, and you talked a little bit about this being a particularly interesting situation because people are being mandated to stay home, so they don't really have much of a choice. Is there anything in terms of working in Asia and the culture here that you think is interesting to note? Is there any research that talks to the impact of social distancing?
So within a global context, a survey recently looked at 55,000 people over the entire world and found that about 1 in 3 people do experience feelings of loneliness quite regularly. So that suggests that we as humans, as we know, don't like being by ourselves. We know that social connectedness and mental health have a relationship, that if you are more isolated, you are more likely to experience mental health problems. Loneliness correlates positively with symptoms of depression. Symptoms of loneliness and depressive symptoms are impacting on your well-being. So there is a really strong link between feeling lonely, feeling isolated, and poor mental health. In Asia specifically, we are a group of very different nations. However, in general, there is quite a collectivist nature to the nations in Asia, and therefore people are used to spending time in quite close proximity with one another. Now, firstly, workplaces therefore are a place where there is typically a lot of social connection going on. And secondly, families are very, very close connections, for better or for worse. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lack of workplace connectedness due to the fact that people aren't at work. However, a lot of family and home life connectedness. And that again is something that can be incredibly positive and beneficial, but also can cause stress. If individuals are sitting in relatively small accommodations and trying to get on with work at the same time as their children or younger generations not being in school, that can cause quite a lot of anxiety and tension, which may lead to higher emotions and difficulties of people's well-being. So it's really important that we are taking into account both the social distancing in terms of the fact that we are staying further away from some people, but also the social connectedness and closeness and all the benefits and costs that can bring with it. The other impact that we've seen quite a lot of, and we will talk a bit more on shortly, but the other impact that we've seen of social distancing in terms of how workplaces are conducting themselves is that when you work from home, you tend to be more liable to checking in with friends, checking in with family, checking in with colleagues on topics that are unrelated to work. So people may well be checking social media and family or friends communications more frequently. And if they've got networks who are feeling anxious in themselves, then work is no longer a refuge. No, work is no longer a place where they can go and concentrate on what they are trying to do. Work is now a place where they are still in the midst of an anxious situation.
Yeah.
Thank you for your sharing. I do want to ask about, so you mentioned something about social connection, and one way in this situation right now is to connect through the internet or through the news. And what about the impact of fake news? We are still hearing a lot of fake news and digital scaremongering with rumors about supplies running out. And one example is that in Hong Kong and somewhere in Asia, that people are starting to stockpiling necessities. So how does this impact people's employees' emotional well-being?
Sure. So when we're sitting in a climate where the general level of emotion is slightly anxious, we are geared as humans to look towards threats when we're feeling anxious. So we are geared to really attend and pay attention to things that are potentially threatening. Now, this means that when we have news which comes out which is either neutral or ambiguous, we tend to put less import on it than the news that is anxiety provoking or threatening. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. If you are sitting in your cave in the Stone Age, you don't want to pay attention to the fact that everything is fine. You want to pay attention to the fact that there is a lion or a tiger coming up. However, when we are in a relatively safe space, paying attention to the more threatening news is less helpful. So it's really important that we notice that, and that employers are able to provide neutral and rounded, correct information to their employees about the coronavirus, the situations in Hong Kong and globally, and the measures that they need to put in place. It's also really important that we can help people to switch off from this fake news, because the news websites and social media are designed to be quite addictive. They're designed to encourage us to click through, to share, and to understand more about what's going on. This is happening in Hong Kong. It's happening very clearly in China. So in China, there was a hashtag "how to deal with feeling anxious at home" was trending on Weibo. It had about 170 million views just earlier this month. So it's happening globally. There's also a big fear that there's misinformation is underreporting the level of impact of the virus, which is causing people to feel further anxious. So in order to try and switch off from this fake news, it's about limiting yourself and trying to not check social media and the news too regularly. So perhaps looking at something once a day to stay up to date. It might be helpful if employers wanted to do so, to send out weekly or updates every 3 days that employees know they can check and rely upon to be reliable information. The WHO website is a great source for this. When you are trying to switch off from fake news, it doesn't work to just not check the news but not do anything else instead. We do need to occupy our mind in another way. So try engaging yourself with other activities. So try either focusing on work if it's working hours, or connecting with your friends, your family, engaging in hobbies, doing things that will be useful for you that help you to take your mind off the news for short periods of time. As I say, social media apps can be quite addictive, so let's make it easier for ourselves. If you are worried and you're finding yourself checking news regularly, then move the apps off the home screen of your phone so it is easier to get away from that news, and it will allow you to just disable them and stop checking them quite as regularly. You can turn off notifications as well, which would also be helpful. And hopefully all of these things will help people to just take a little bit of a break. It does not make the problem go away, it does not make the threat go away. However, it will allow us to pull in perspective and see other things that are going on in life as well, which will bring our anxiety down. And once our anxiety is down, we'll be more able to look at more neutral or more rounded sources of information, because we won't be geared quite so much towards that threat.
Thank you, Hannah. And I think that's it's actually, a great segue into my next question. And you spoke about like managing anxiety and all of that, and just quickly, because we have a lot more questions and we do want to have some time at the end for Q&A. If I could ask, in terms of specifically for individuals, what recommendations do you have when it comes to personal regulation and trying to cope with some of the difficult emotions we're dealing with at this time?
Sure. So we at Mind, we've split the sort of emotions that people are experiencing into worry and uncertainty, but also loneliness, low mood, isolation. So managing that anxiety, that worry, that stress. First of all, notice them early. Don't wait until they're overwhelming. Notice them early. Check in with yourself each day to make sure that you are feeling okay. And if you're not, that's all right. It's natural to feel worried. Separate out what's in your control and what's external to your control, because we can't control everything. We can't control a lot of what's going on at the moment. So it's therefore important to notice what you can do to help yourself or to help other people. Once you've got there, then there are lots of things you can do. You can engage in breathing and mindfulness exercises. This, again, is not saying that breathing and mindfulness will make the problem go away, but it can help you to relax and therefore manage it more effectively. Connect with other people rather than isolate. Get outside where it's safe to, go for a walk, and really look after your physical self. If you're able to connect with other people, try to do so, but try and avoid talking about the current situation. In terms of loneliness and sadness, again, it's about recognizing that they're going to be there and acknowledging the fact that they are there. Make contact with people in creative ways. You can phone, you can text, you can email, meet people online. Remember that if you're feeling lonely, very small social contacts do count. It doesn't need to be really meaningful. Actually, just saying hi to someone can really lift your mood. The biology that occurs when we interact with another person does give us a little boost. If you have an animal or a pet, spend time with them. But actually, it's really important to spend time on our own. We're not very good at doing this. So try, if you are alone or you are in an unusual circumstance, to pull back a little bit and realize that sometimes this can help us have time to do something we enjoy. Spending time by ourselves could be an opportunity to try something new. And finally, if you're feeling lonely or you're feeling low, then techniques such as mindfulness, meditation, journal writing can help us to relax. Again, it doesn't solve the problem, but it does help us to feel calmer, which allows us to take that perspective and work out what we need to do. The final thing I would add to all of this is that although we are uncertain about what's going on in terms of the virus, in terms of the implications it will have, we know it won't last forever. So pulling back and realizing that this is a temporary state of affairs is going to be really helpful for people to allow them to manage more effectively.
So it's really us also trying to strike a balance. I think, Michael had a question about this. And I think before we transition into asking Fern to come on and talk through some of the topics, one final question from me would be, what can companies do to really prioritize the well-being of their employees at this time, specifically with regards to how can they minimize the negative impact and really focus on showing proactive support?
Sure. So I think that we are in a position at the moment where companies are having to adapt quite quickly to a different situation, and therefore it's going to be a little bit creative in how you do this. And the fact is that most workforces will be quite sympathetic to the fact this is an unusual situation. So trialing new things within your companies could be a really useful thing to do at this time. In terms of supporting the workforce, I've got a few tips for you. There's, I think, one more slide with tips on it. This is in conjunction with City Mental Health Alliance Hong Kong, who have released some tips. They and we suggest making sure you're providing regular communications. Encourage face-to-face check-ins. So either over Skype or Zoom, encourage face-to-face check-in sessions with your colleagues. We at Mind have our regular meetings, but also have a half-hour slot on a Wednesday and on a Friday where people can just log in and have a quick chat over online. Remember that you need to be really flexible. So make sure that people are aware that they can be flexible with remote working, as it might not be feasible for all staff. Make sure that you've got the support in place to provide IT guidelines, workplace guidelines, in order to make sure that people are understanding and have the facilities to do the work that they need. It's really important to set clear expectations to your staff in a time like this, and really highlight the fact that staff aren't expected to be staying logged in or checking their emails after their shift is finished. In an individual basis, encouraging a workplace routine can be really helpful. So suggesting to people that they keep a set work pattern, that they stop for lunch and they leave the room that they're working in, can be really helpful. And remember that people are currently looking after children who are not in education, so you need to be flexible around this. If you can make sure that your employees are looking after their physical selves as well, that can be very helpful, encouraging them to stay active, to take care of themselves, providing resources for exercise routines they can do at home, providing the sessions and ways that they can connect together. Finally, you can provide training to workforces to allow them better understanding of mental health implications. And I know that this stuff is on a slide, which is just towards the end of the presentation, which Michael can show you a bit later on.
Thank you, Hannah. Just to mention that we'll be sharing the slide and the video after the webinar. Thank you, Hannah, again for sharing all the tips in how to manage all the emotional responses. And now moving to Fern. So this health crisis seems to have brought for some xenophobic attitudes and behaviors towards mainland Chinese, as well as people of Asian descent around the world. So how can employers promote an inclusive workplace for everyone?
Okay, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. And huge thanks to Hannah of Mind Hong Kong for sharing her expertise with us. Okay, so it's really, really disturbing to see a rise in xenophobic attitudes towards Asians around the world during this crisis. In fact, there's been reports of bullying and violence against people of Asian descent. This is caused by fear, distrust, and I think people are searching for a scapegoat. The media could also be influencing views, and we know that social media is a breeding ground for such negative attitudes. Locally, as Hannah mentioned, we see some of the frustrations and lack of trust in the government and also anti-mainland sentiment that's carried over from last year's political unrest. Xenophobia, bigotry, racism, and other types of discrimination could be very harmful in the workplace and affect staff morale. At times like this, we need unity. We need inclusive and empathetic leadership. So we all need to work together to ensure that our workplaces and communities are rational and welcoming, as well as healthy and positive and virus-free. So some of the things that employers can do to create a workplace that treats everyone with dignity and respect and creates a sense of belonging for each employee, you can see on the slide. So there's 4 areas that I would like to talk about today. First of all, so this slide is about what organizations can do, and I'll also talk after this about what individuals can do as well. First of all, institutionalizing equality by having company policies, guidelines, and procedures. Your policies should specifically say that xenophobia, racism, and other types of discrimination are not allowed and won't be tolerated, and the consequences. Your policies should include specific examples of xenophobic or racist behaviors, such as hate speech, making jokes, mocking someone's accent or culture, bullying, harassment, etc. Xenophobic or racist behavior could be subtle and not direct, and sometimes it could also be unconscious, such as showing distrust or suspicion, avoiding communication or contact, and so on. There should also be clear reporting procedures if employees feel they've been discriminated against, and employers have a responsibility to investigate thoroughly and respond to all complaints. And they also should show empathy and respect to the individual making the complaint. So the second point is about building a workplace culture that values diversity and fosters inclusion. Developing cultural acumen and sensitivity through training and activities or events that raise awareness and celebrate cultural diversity. Workplaces could also encourage healthy discourse, so providing a safe space where individuals will feel safe to raise issues and express how they're feeling. So the third area is around leadership. Leaders have a huge role to play in what they say and how they behave. They should communicate in a way that brings people together rather than divides people, and talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion to business and to themselves personally, and really be a role model for inclusive leadership. And last but not least, communicate. So this is organizationally communicating both internally and externally. You can make xenophobia a visible issue and not sweeping it under the carpet. And I'm talking not just about company policies, but also communicating in ways that show the harmful impacts of xenophobia through storytelling. Also finding ways to celebrate diverse role models, employees within your company. So those are the things that organizations can do. So the next slide is around measures that individuals, each one of us, can take to defeat xenophobia. So the first measure is calling out xenophobic behavior if it's safe to do so. And I know sometimes this is not something that's easy to do, but using calm, reasoned arguments to illustrate that you don't need to fear a group just because they're different or from somewhere else, and providing information or facts to dispel misconceptions and to change people's perspectives. I think it's really important to stand in visible solidarity with the other groups that are being discriminated against in your daily lives. So be an active ally, stand up for other people. So those are some of the things that both employers and individuals can do to create an inclusive workplace environment for all.
Thank you, Fern. Those are some really practical steps that as both organizations, leaders and organizations and individuals, we can take. Similar to the question I asked Hannah about what can companies do to prioritize, and I kind of emphasize on the word prioritize employee well-being, due to the fact that there is also a lot of other things that companies, organizations have to juggle at the same time. So what do you think companies can do specifically to prioritize this issue?
So we wrote a blog, I think we published it a couple weeks ago, with an infographic. So I do encourage people to access that on our website. We'll also be showing a link to that at the end of the session. Okay, so taking measures to ensure that your employees are in the best physical and emotional health at this difficult time is really important. We all know that healthy and happy employees are productive employees, and organizations need to consider the long-term safety and health of their employees. We've already seen the negative impact of the coronavirus on many businesses and the wider economy. And Hannah also mentioned about negative feelings that people might have, especially if they've experienced SARS a number of years ago. So it's not surprising that people are feeling afraid, helpless, stressed, and so on. And this could have a very negative impact on their work and mental well-being, and not to mention their physical well-being if they fall sick. So at Community Business, we've compiled a list of measures, and I'm just going to, just in the interest of time, just focus on a few of them, because we've already focused on some of them, especially related to emotional and mental well-being that Hannah covered. First and foremost, I think that companies should show care, kindness, and understanding to all their employees and take their health concerns seriously, especially if they decide that they want to self-quarantine or they want to keep working from home. I think companies should try to respect it. Companies, as we know, everybody in Hong Kong, we're going through this working from home working experiment. And many companies are also, especially maybe the next few weeks, as government offices and other organizations are coming back into the office. I mean, you're going to have to make decisions around your flexible working policies. Just a few extra points here on working from home. Companies should make allowances for loss of motivation when teams are siloed for an extended period of time. We talked about having short, regular catch-up meetings to keep people engaged. And some of our employees are also dealing with their kids, school-age kids, or even kids that are kindergarten or nursery age, being at home all the time. So they're having to deal with maybe disruptions that maybe they normally wouldn't have if they were working from home in in healthier times. Employees should, everybody, one of us, I've had issues working from home. I just haven't been active and going out and just getting enough exercise. So we all need to take regular breaks and build in some exercise routine or keep active within the confines of what's safe and appropriate. And we should also be mindful that some employees actually prefer to work in the office, especially if they don't have an appropriate home environment to facilitate working from home. So companies should allow for this if it's practical. We talked about emotional as well as physical well-being should be taken into consideration. Many companies have EAP, Employee Assistance Program providers that have a hotline, 24/7 hotline for employees. So it'd be good to remind your employees of these services and what the hotline numbers are and what are the services that are provided. I think the other thing too is really considering the impact on your clients, your vendors, suppliers, and other stakeholders during this crisis. For example, your clients might be cutting budgets, or they might be deferring their business decisions. And that would have a knock-on effect on your own activities and also employee morale. So companies are now having to sometimes, reschedule, reprioritize, or restructuring their work in order to, adjust to their clients and customers. So companies have a responsibility to provide a safe and healthy work environment for employees. So, just some of the basic things about, more frequent office cleaning, disinfecting high traffic areas, making sure, if possible, that you provide protective equipment to your employees to maintain workplace hygiene, especially as employees might be going back to the offices in the next several weeks. So in summary, we encourage employers to practice transparency, kindness, empathy, and patience with their employees at this difficult time.
Thank you. And I think much of what both you and Hannah shared with us today really highlights that key takeaway that you really summarized in one sentence. My final question, can you give any examples of companies that are doing this well?
I think the companies that are doing this well are the ones that have embraced working from home and flexible working already, and they already have policies and practices around this way of working, and also the technology infrastructure to support it. And the companies also that are doing well would be the ones that have already thought holistically about employee well-being, not just their physical health, but their emotional health and work-life harmony.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There are a of questions, I'm sure, that is our listeners have. I have already listened to, I've already picked up on one question that's come up here. And you did talk about this, Fern, about the issue of the students and parents being home and their kids being home at the same time. So we have a question on, are there some tips, and either you or both of you could answer this question, are there some tips on dealing with the additional stress that staff might be feeling with this added caregiving role?
Yes, maybe I can just add a few points here. I think for many of us, it's not just kids. For me, my kids are all grown up, so I actually have elder care issues, and I also have my my husband milling around home as well. So people feel that because you're at home, you're available to do stuff that's not related to work, and you know you get a lot more disruptions than you would normally have, when you're working from home, when the kids are not around, your partner, your spouse are not around. So I try to, tell people at home, what my boundaries are in terms of the calls that I might be having during the day. I actually, give my family an update on what my day will look like, so that at least, they know that they shouldn't be interrupting.
Hannah, just to, the last question, just to repeat that, what, do you have any tips in terms of
Sorry, Sakshmi, you're both muted at the moment, so I can't hear you.
All right, am I back on now? Okay.
I can hear you, perfect, yeah.
Thanks, Holly, by the way, for pointing out about the feedback issue with the mics. I hope you can hear it much clearer now. Hannah, just to pose that question to you, the question was around with these added caregiving duties of children being home, but also, as Fern pointed out, it's not just limited to that. It could be elderly caregiving duties as well. How, and given the environment we're all in, how can we manage that added stress?
It's really difficult to manage that added stress. We all have a nice routine that works well for us and our families, and suddenly there's been a big change has been placed into it. I see quite a lot of teenage patients actually in my clinical practice, and parents and teenagers are really struggling because teenagers will naturally push boundaries anyway, as is part of their development. However, parents are not only pushing back because they are needing to parent, but also because they are very worried about their child's safety at the moment. So it's big tension. So I think that the biggest tip from a mental health perspective will just be a shared understanding. So as Fern said, it's about being really clear with what you need to do that day, so that everybody in the family knows when they need quiet and when they can be a bit noisier. I think when it comes to that family conversation is going to be really, really key. So understanding what young people need to do for their schoolwork, what parents need to do in terms of meetings that they have at work, but actually perhaps taking advantage of the fact that for once everyone is in the home a little bit more. And therefore there might be a certain time of day where you can come together where you normally would not be able to. So I think it's about, firstly, communication. Secondly, pulling back and realizing that this is an opportunity as well as a difficult situation. But finally, encouraging where safe and where appropriate people to take time out and to be a bit creative in where they work or where their spaces are around the house or outside of the house, just to make sure people are getting a bit of space.
Thank you, Hannah, for all the sharing, and also thank you, Fern, for all the sharing as well. So in mind of time, so we're gonna wrap up the webinar just to share some resources from both Community Business and Mind Hong Kong. So this is the infographic that Fern mentioned about what companies could do during the outbreak, how to prioritize employee well-being. So it's available for free on our website. And also, this is the resources that Hannah mentioned about from Mind Hong Kong trainings, mental health trainings offered by Mind Hong Kong. And finally, these are 7 key initiatives from community business that we're doing in terms of employee well-being in Asia. So including employee well-being link, virtual platforms, and also training and consulting. And finally, a new offerings from CB in terms of Asia Employee Wellbeing Link. So that's the end of our webinar. I'll be sending out the slides to everyone, and also the video after editing. So thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Michael Chan, and also Sakshi, Fern, and Hannah. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.